Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. So we're starting up another one of our little series, as we like to do at our Little Gin and Tantra podcast. Again, in a bigger context, part of our year-long series, 2025 America, What the Hell? This time we're addressing questions around like Christianity. And part of this has to do with the more dangerous parts of Christianity that happen to be in the United States, but also what Daniel and I decided to do as part of like maybe a bigger educational thing, because we like to be an educational podcast, a bigger educational project on the incredible diversity within Christianity just at the core. And it's a really fascinating subject. In some ways, you might say Christianity is more diverse than even maybe most other traditions. You can see what you think by the end of this because it's
Yeah,
pretty wild, just the
I would
amount
agree.
of stuff here.
I would
Yeah,
agree.
totally agree. And it's fascinating, right? But before all of that, we'll promise we'll get to it, but we're going to ask you first to do all the things that people ask you to do at the beginning of every podcast you ever listen to or watch, which will be doing the liking and the subscribing, send it to a friend, do all the little things that people ask because obviously it helps people out. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I guess we'll get on into it. Any like preliminary things you want to say about any of this stuff, Daniel, or we should just
No.
start doing it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. How did we get to this? Well, part of it is part of this thing we've been asking questions about what's going on in the world. And this is the real question of like Christian nationalism, right? And the idea that there are potentially the more problematic Christianities that we'll try to explore as we go along. For me, my first kind of exposure to this way of thinking goes back, and I've brought him up a couple of times in episodes here and there, was Chris Hedges, or is Chris Hedges. So he was a journalist who got in trouble for writing negative things about the Iraq War when the Iraq War was still considered to be like such a patriotic and positive thing. And he basically, was one of the rare journalists that was willing to write negative things about that back in like the aughts, right? But, he wrote a book called American Fascists. And I think, like I said in the previous episode, I was looking through and I kind of remembered he had done a book on Christian nationalism, but I didn't remember the title. I had it in my little audiobook thing and I was like searching it back out again. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So that was the name of the book. And it's part of other things I guess we can recommend around this. There's the really famous book, Jesus and John Wayne, which we might make reference to. I definitely like the book Star Spangled Jesus, which gets into these kinds of questions. And I think Daniel and I are both like finding our way through Separation of Church and Hate by John Fugelsang.
Yes.
So we got to like, we're doing the research for you at the G&T podcast. That's our public service. But anyways, so I think for me, it's something that has been on my mind for, the last 20 years or something almost, right? After hearing people pointing out this as a real problem. And the Chris Hedges thing has felt more and more sort of prophetic, as time has gone on, because there is like, there's again, Christianity is so diverse, and what we're going to try to do is cover the diversity of it, but it's also the truth that there are what you might call problematic Christianities. You have anything to say about that, Daniel? The whole idea of like a problematic Christianity in the midst of all of its diversity, or should we keep going through?
No, I think we can keep going through because I mean the reason for that's the preamble, and then you'll talk about why that's the case. So,
Hmm.
uh, yeah,
We'll get into all kinds of stuff around
yeah,
this.
yeah.
All right, if you're not as familiar with, what would be a problematic Christianity or what's really going on here, I think one of the great ways to illustrate this is there's a thing called the Seven Mountain Mandate, and it's a theological idea in kind of the right wing, again, more problematic aspects of the United States Christianity. And the whole idea is it's that this evangelical minority population of Christians have a kind of a mandate to like essentially take over the society. I laugh because it's so bizarre. And eventually the world, right? The Seven Mountain Mandate. And the Seven Mountains refer to these different parts of the society that there's this divine mandate for this group of people to start to like take over in this sort of authoritarian style. So if you're not familiar with it, it's again, it's it's part of the jargon within these circles. And if you've never been in these spaces, and I've been spending a little bit more time in these spaces over the last year just because we've been trying to talk about this for our pod and for my education. It's like quite a thing. So the seven mountains are taking over the family and dictating how the family is supposed to be, taking over religion, taking over education, taking over media, taking over arts and entertainment. So the entertainment business, taking over business as a business, and then taking over the government. And it seems wild to think that there are people who would have this, but it's a bizarre factoid that there's a disproportionate number of people who are like in positions of authority in the United States that this is their underlying philosophy. So like Russell Vogt, who's like part of the government, is a big person with this. It's Mike Johnson, who's the head of the House of Representatives, right? He's one of these people. Pete Hegseth is one of these people who's our Department of Defense slash war. Uh, you know, so it's like it's a real thing. And it's, again, if you're not familiar with it, it's very eye-opening to, all of a sudden go into a part of the world that you're not familiar with. And you're like, oh, wow, this is like something that's truly believed in this segment of the culture that otherwise I'd have no exposure to. So if you look at the stats on it, as many as 41% of American Christians hold this belief, apparently. When you look at some of the statistics around this, you see different numbers. Obviously, that's not a small group of people. I've also heard it said that it's 30% of the population overall. And there's 13% that are really hardcore on this. And there's another 27% that are kind of like mostly in. So it's not a small thing. And obviously, this is sort of a dangerous aspect of the Christian tradition. Though, like what we'll get to ultimately is Christianity is like astonishingly diverse. And so part of what the goal in the episodes for me is to start expressing like the incredible diversity within this, and also with the feeling like this is a minority kind of aspect. It just happens to be a very highly motivated and potentially dangerous group of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but keep in mind about probably 66% of the country is Christian.
So you get 41% of the 66. Yeah. And
That's a
the other
lot.
part of it is like if you get 30% who are really into it and they all pile into one of a two-party political system,
Correct.
they're dangerous. Yeah.
Well, I remember
But
we learned from Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point is that rule of three, that 30 anything over 30% is a quorum essentially enough
yeah.
to swing a vote in a boardroom, enough to create, I guess second guessing in any large enough sample. And so that this is that number. That's that number.
Yeah. As we've been doing the episodes over the course of the year, though, I have been a little bit heartened, I guess I would say, by how strong the reaction back has been. There really
Yeah.
is a strong reaction happening back.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and it's a very interesting thing because there's this, like, in listening to people who study this stuff, and I've been willing to do that, my own interest, but also for our episodes, like, there's a certain understanding, like, okay, we're not going to be a popular thing. So it's really a question of, like, what can we do by force?
Who's we?
The people within the Christian nationalist movement. They sort
Mm.
of know, like, okay, it's not like we're going to win over hearts and minds. This has to
Hmm.
be done in some
Hmm.
ways by force.
Hmm.
That's kind of like the Project 2025 thing. As far as it goes, just to finish this section off, and like, it'll be interesting to see what we want to do about this. But there's this thing called the New Apostolic Reformation. This is like another like Christian movement in the United States, which is kind of overlapping, and they have a lot of this stuff going on. So maybe as we talk about, we're going to do a history lesson around this because it's fascinating, right?
Mm.
Just to see like, wow, this Christianity is amazing in terms of like all the things that it spawns
Mm.
is unbelievable. Um, but it's when we do get maybe when we get to things in the United States, there's this new apostolic reformation I've been learning about over the last year, and it's sort of these smaller, they're not small, but they're not part of the mainline, what they call the mainline churches. They're independent churches, they're evangelical, and they're very political, right? And as an example of someone like that, there's Paula White, who's the personal pastor to the president. She has her office in the White House, and she's pretty wild, right? And it's these highly political kind of actors. So that's, I guess, kind of the description of like the problematic part of the situation that's like, I guess, always going to be something that is going to have to be addressed. I mean, again, you look at Chris Hedges, he's writing about this in the context of the Iraq War a couple of decades ago, right? And the problem is going to be kind of an ongoing one. But the way I think about this is the more awareness there is around this, the more people can be proactive to address what is like a subpopulation of a spiritual tradition that has a toxicity at the core of it. Is that how
Hmm.
you feel about it too, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, so we didn't talk about this, but I want to do an episode, and we're going to do one maybe next time on accelerationism.
Oh yeah, I think we should do tech bro Christianity too.
Well, I mean, acceleration runs the gamut for both parties. So I like I have a thing laid out, but I'm gonna put this here for now because it fits with what we're talking about, right?
But you have the idea like acceleration in terms of like the tech bro kind of philosophy of
It's not just
accelerationism.
that. It's not just them. That's the right side of the aisle. There's a left side of the aisle accelerationism that exists as well. But for here,
Oh, they're using this term in a different way. Okay, so it's cool. You'll explain what I mean. We'll talk about it when we do
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. So
episode.
I'm
Yeah,
we're
I
gonna
associate it with like the tech world that they want
it
to
is it that's
push
part
everything forward, right?
that's right, but
Technologically.
that
Yeah.
doesn't come from them, you know? That they don't they're essentially like not super useful in society. Like, yeah, we have who gives a fuck, Facebook, whatever. I heard this the other day. Someone was like, "Oh, if they let you use something for free, what are they getting out of it?" You know what I'm saying? So, in a
Oh, we'll have to
sense,
debate that. I think those people are pretty dangerous. So but that's
no,
that's to
they're
be talked
dangerous. I'm
about.
saying
Yeah.
useful. I didn't say not dangerous.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Useful, no,
You're making a distinction. Yeah.
not useful. But um the the scary part about like religiosity is the orthodoxy,
Yeah.
is the power, and simultaneously the fragility of it, because anything that is actually most things in my opinion that are strong don't seek to disempower others in attempts to keep their own strength. You have strong inherently in what it is that you believe. So why do you feel the need to subjugate others in order to prove your strength?
I
You,
think it's a fascinating part about the whole history of like if we're talking about this particularly in Christianity, we'll talk about orthodoxy overall.
yeah.
But it's interesting because these traditions splinter around these points,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you get the hyper orthodox ones, and those are the ones that are more dangerous. Yeah.
Correct. And that is and unfortunately that is what bleeds. This is what is an extension of those ideas, right? The,
Yeah.
the the far out ideas are what sticks around. So, anyways, this idea of accelerationism, right? And so I kind of had this prepared already. So, acceleration can be seen as a collective nervous system dysregulation strategy. Instead of reducing stimulation, it proposes learning into the forces that feel overwhelming: speed, technology, capitalism, and cultural fragmentation, until a breakthrough or a breakdown, essentially.
Mhm,
And so
mhm,
on a
mhm.
on a cultural level, that's what this is. But where does this come from? Well, this comes from basically every, at least Abrahamic tradition that is messianic in its practice. And I don't mean they believe in a Messiah. I mean they believe the Messiah is going to return. And
So
so,
this is part of the acceleration concept, the way that you're using it.
yes,
Okay, I haven't heard
yes,
this idea. Okay, go
yeah,
ahead, lay it
yeah,
on me.
yeah. And so basically, from the beginning, like even going back to like John the Baptist, he obviously was Jewish, right?
Hmm.
He was an end times person. He was a, Revelations believer practitioner. Now, maybe if we fast forwarded it today, we would say, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist, right? But the world is going to come to an end, fire and brimstone. Get ready. It's happening.
Well, they're kind of like like evangelical Christians now. That thing exists all the time. End times
Correct.
Christianity hasn't gone away
Correct.
because it's like you can trace it back to the roots of it in some ways. That's always
Correct.
kind of been hanging around. But yeah, go ahead.
And no, right. And it's present in Judaism.
Hmm.
It's present in Islam. And they all have and there's many sects that get broken up over how they view this.
Really, really interesting in that because you bring it up, and this is like outside my knowledge zone, and I'd be curious just to hear. I was like looking at the obviously there's a Judaism aspect of this, and it's actually in the book of Daniel. So I was like, okay, Book of Daniel.
All
But I
right.
don't know as much about that, how that's handled in Islam. You want to give people like a 30-second primer on that? Is that something you can do?
I mean,
Because I
I'm
don't
not going to
know
do it.
that tradition.
I'm
Uh-huh.
not going to do it justice. What I'm going to say is that
Okay.
like
Okay. Save for some other time then maybe.
yeah, but
Hmm.
it's so Sunnis and Shias and people who are watching this, feel free to dunk on me. I don't have, this is just off the top of my head. They are there's discrepancies as to when and who the prophet will be when they return, if they have returned.
Oh,
Okay, so this is how those things are, how those ideas are broken up. But again, it's broken up around these ideas of these accelerationistic ideas, right? And so that being put forth as this belief system way back when, 2000 plus years ago, is still influencing where we're at now. The difference is the people who have influence now are have far more influence than they've had before over a much larger swath of people. Now, we can argue and say, well, what do you mean? The Romans had over huge control over people. Yeah, they did. They did. But I think that their aims, well, I don't think, definitely, their aims were different than now. So they might have been accelerationist, but newsflash, the Romans weren't really practicing Christianity. That was for the peasants. That was for
you
the
can like,
slaves.
yeah, you can kind of like think about those questions for sure.
They,
Hmm.
they really weren't. I mean, even the messages of Paul were not of Jesus's words. They never met.
Yeah, that's something to like get through when you talk about the subtypes of Christianity as we go through it. Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you have, Christianity as an ideology that was used to, um, I don't know, enliven servants, workers, give them something. Oh, don't worry about being poor in this lifetime. As soon as you go to heaven, man, you're going to have everything you possibly could want, which is one of the things that that the West will dunk on Islam for the
Hmm.
people who, blow themselves up. Obviously, they're not, taking life is never good, whether it be your own or somebody else's, right? But they say, oh, they promise them things in heaven. Really? That's oddly familiar. Isn't that? I
Yeah,
don't
that's
know.
like across the board. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But so they all share a similar source. And so this idea, this kind of like, dare I say, sort of perverse idea of end times, and let's usher ourselves to this end times, is present in the tech oligarchy kind of thing, in the evangelical kind of thing, in Orthodox Judaism. They want this,
So,
and
but the best way of using accelerationism is to say, like, we're pushing together, we're pushing towards some goal that we want realized that has a semi-apocalyptic kind of vibe to it on some
absolute,
level.
yes,
So that's how you're
exactly,
using it. Okay, I get
yes,
it. And there's a
yeah,
truth to that.
yeah,
Yeah. I was thinking about this, and we'll do it in different ways as we go. It'll be a
mm-hmm,
loose and free and easy conversation, as we like to say in our Taoist
mm-hmm.
world. We'll free and easy wander our way through, Taoist saying. But yeah, I was thinking like when you translate this stuff forward, a lot of these things are like in the modern Christianity, but the threads are back there, even in
Yes.
the earliest seeds of it. It's kind of again, I don't know. I find this shit fascinating.
Oh, this
It's
this
like
fascinates me. Yeah,
so, I mean, so hopefully other people listening will also ultimately find it fascinating too.
yeah,
But I feel like you really learn a lot when you sort of see the context of this. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe before we totally move on, I did look at our new friend for the pod, John Fugelsang, the comedian who wrote this Separation of Church and Hate.
Mm-hmm.
And he says this, I think, in a very nice way. So I thought I would just share his checklist of what he thinks happens once you have orthodoxy taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like the way you're saying it, Daniel, this might be orthodoxy in a Christian sense or in a Muslim sense or in the big three, Judaism, or really anything that you might get that goes orthodox, whether you're in India
Yeah.
or other parts of the Asian world. You can
Yeah.
always
But
have potentially this problem. And he has like a kind of a checklist of the things that you see. So I thought I would share it. But
sure. Yeah. Go. I just wanted to say that, even orthodoxy, the term orthodoxy is a spectrum.
mhm.
Everything is a spectrum. So, someone could be more, left leaning politically, but they may not hold the same beliefs as somebody else who is even further left than they are, or same thing on the right side. So even the term orthodoxy, you don't automatically believe that everything that everybody else who considers themselves quote unquote orthodox believes. I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, I'm using part of my source for this. Again, I have different people I sourced out. I like to kind of like do a little research for what we're doing. And there's a scholar on the New Testament named Bart Ehrman, and he basically has a line he uses over and over again, which is like, orthodoxy is like my doxy.
Mm,
My doxy is orthodoxy, and your doxy is not orthodoxy. If you don't agree with me, and all of a sudden you're heterodox or you're
yes,
heretical, if I want to go even further with
that's
it.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll explore it because it's, again, I think this is, I don't know if we get this education on these
No.
subjects in our culture, and it's mind-blowing.
Well, you
We can even
don't.
question why we don't get it. You
Well,
can be
that's
suspicious even why we don't,
correct. And I
but
was
it's,
going to say,
yeah.
because that pulls at the fabric of the culture itself. It pulls at the foundation of how it is that we exist as a system of learning. Just generally overall, like Christianity and or really like Catholics, right? Roman Catholics. That was used as a measure of control and influence for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they
Well,
were developed
thousands,
thousands.
millennia,
Yeah, I
really.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and it really never. They say the Roman Empire never really collapsed; it just morphed into capitalism. It's like
Philip K. Dick has the line, the sci-fi writer, the empire never ended, right?
yeah, it really
Yeah.
didn't. And so
Yeah.
you have this sort of weaving together, and some people might be bothered by this. Some people might think, oh, that's the power of quote unquote Christ or God or whatever. But you have essentially a teacher in Christ who preached about taking care of the poor, helping the stranger, focusing on your own divine spark, right? Freedom, equality, and using your money to help people, not to be rich, not at all, actually. And in comparison to how that got changed, it's the opposite. Talking to people, and if you look online or whatever, have discussions with people, they quote, and this is probably super inside baseball, but like you'll hear far more quotations from Paul out of the New Testament than you will like Jesus's words. And why? It's because his message doesn't fit if you're going to try and systematize those teachings. How can you systematize people being free beings and make them into better workers? Or you can't scare people by saying, "Hey, you infinite soul that are going to last forever and keep learning and reincarnating and whatnot." Like that is not motivating for people to work harder. And that's not you can't systematize that. You can't create a structure out of that. So they took the teachings that he learned or that he shared, and they made him into something that was more palatable. That's something they could make into a government. And
Well, the weird thing is like it splinters in like the very beginning. It's kind of a wild story.
yeah,
Like it splinters like right out the gate, whatever that means. And it's like a weird story to tell. But like it just so something happens, whatever happened in those early years, couple thousand years ago, something happens and the whole thing splinters. And I know what you're saying though. There is like this definite dichotomy, which will break it apart as we go through the splintering, like of like
hmm
Paul versus like what you would happen if you read the gospel or something, depending on how you want to read those books, right? Because they're not simple
hmm
books either. It's a wild story. Yeah.
I mean, his people often forget that like Jesus had a brother,
Yeah, James.
right? And James actually took over his work because that's his brother.
James and Paul don't get along.
Not at all, which is
Yeah.
very strange.
Hmm.
One would argue that Paul might have had James, you know, axed.
I don't know if that comes up in the books of Acts, people being axed or not.
Right.
I don't know. But anyways, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
wild story. It's a wild story. Yeah. All right, well, I'll do the John Fukuseng stuff and
Yeah.
then we'll
Yeah. Yeah.
like keep like breaking it through because
Yeah.
it's definitely wild. Anyways, he makes these points. I like the idea of like, okay, we say something is orthodox and it's problematic. What do we really mean by that, right?
hmm
And okay, so here's the features. If you want to know you're dealing with orthodoxy, here's a checklist, right? And maybe
hmm
this applies like across the board. So one of the things like it could be pointed out here is like a literalism that you take whatever you're being exposed to and you don't read it symbolically or you don't read it poetically, you read it like absolutely literal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've read it literal, the idea is that you want that to be imposed upon other people. So I read it literal, and then I'm going to take my literal interpretation and I'm going to make you follow it, right?
What's that term again, Eric?
He uses literalism for this.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the other point he makes about it is a little phrase, low empathy, high certainty. Once I have the certainty, then my empathy falls. But we've kind of used this phrase before. Sometimes in again, when you get to this more problematic Christian circles in the United States, they talk about like toxic empathy,
Mm.
right? But what they're getting to in a way is this idea of we've decided how this is supposed to be interpreted in this literal way, and then we all have to follow it to the letter. So if you're not following it to the letter, you don't deserve any empathy. That's sort of how the equation ends up working itself out, which again, I find really fascinating that it plays
Mm.
out that way, right? So then you get like high punishment systems. So as opposed to like, and this is well when you talk about like Jesus too, again, Dan, like you were talking about before, we're not talking about forgiveness.
No.
We're talking about a crackdown, right?
Yes.
You don't follow our way of doing things. And of course, that can happen in Christianity. That can happen in any of these
Anyone. Yeah,
traditions.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this goes all over the world
This, yeah,
potentially.
yeah.
Yeah, this can go ugly all over the place. So I like it so far. It seems like it speaks to the problem of it. And then he talks about kind of knowledge resistance. The minute you have something invested in an orthodoxy, and it's literal, then anything that would challenge that becomes instantly panic inducing, right? So then you have to be, in a certain sense, anti-science or like anti-knowledge almost in general,
Mm.
because your ideas have a fragility to them, right? You're reading something literal that should probably be read poetically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or probably should be read more loosely. You're so invested in this little literal interpretation and so much is hanging on it that it's just fragile. And so you can't let new information come in, which I think is very kind of a wise observation as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Then the other part is, and I'm kind of condensing the way this gets talked about, but hierarchy, right, is a dominant thing, which inevitably gets tied into like patriarchy as a problematic thing, which inevitably leads to like oligarchy.
Mm.
So one way or another, you end up with these ideas piling on top of one another, where you have to hierarchy out the society that you're looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to impose a hierarchy. And that again happens all over the world. And I guess when you get into the Taoist world or the Tantric world or our home bases, you're intrinsically against that. Like that's a problem, like right at the core, right? And this
Yeah.
has come up in different episodes along the way. And then it's tied into patriarchy, and we've done episodes on that too over our little podcast history where we've tried to address that question in a more immediate way. So that's a problem. But eventually, what I found interesting is eventually it collapsed into like an oligarchy. You're going to have to get some people on the top of that hierarchy, and they're going to want to dominate everyone else. So there's a certain inevitability in that whole way of thinking. I think it's profound again, right? And that can
Yeah.
happen across any authoritarian Orthodox system. Superiority
Mm, for
in the
sure.
sense of like we're the people who are saved and you are not.
Mm.
And sometimes it's you are the people who are fucked and we're the people who are saved. Therefore, we have superiority, right? I think, but I don't know if it's always framed in terms of the saving thing. Obviously, Christianity has that kind of language. Does that
Mm-hmm.
happen in Islam in that same way? Do you feel like that language? I don't know if I know. I like the Sufi parts of Islam. I don't know if I know as well how those things are phrased in the more orthodox parts of
I
it.
don't,
Do you have
I'm not,
insight in that?
yeah.
Okay, you want to touch, yeah, it's a hard thing. Let's we really prepped it out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so those kinds of things. And so then the next idea, and we can discuss it through, is that whenever you get to the more fundamentalist parts of any of like tradition like this, the argument goes, this is always going to be the angriest people, right? It's anger inducing for whatever the
Mm.
set of reasons are around it. It creates a kind of an anger and a hostility towards others. It's usually aggressive and violent in kind of an interesting way, in the sense that the violence gets more and more justified from our side because we are the ones who have the right view and we are the superior people, and
Mm.
therefore we're justified somehow.
Right.
There's that sort of instant, like magical justification thing that happens, right? Which on the one hand can lead to things like xenophobia
Oh, yeah.
and the hatred of the outsiders, right, will happen naturally out of that. And this came even when we were doing the social psychology stuff of this, right? The
Mm-hmm.
minute you get that in group, you have hostility towards the out group, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
threatening. And then like the ability, I guess, from the people who are more at the top of the hierarchy to direct that animosity and hatred, like it's able to be targeted or something, you know? It's kind of wild to me. And we don't have to dwell on it too much, but I was talking with a couple of students, you know, Latino students, and we were just having a longer conversation just about like how wild it is that all of this animosity got targeted this time on that group of people. Like that was the group that really got all the target, right? So heavily on them, though it's broad spread hostility. But like even of the groups that are like still, I remember back to like if we go back 10 years or something, it was a lot of hostility to like the Muslim world, right? That was still sort
Yeah.
of the target was directed in different places at different times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the anti-Semitism was out there too in that same time period. The Jews
Mm-hmm.
will not replace us in Charlottesville. But it's wild how that's directable, right? You can just kind of
It is
shift
directable.
that
Correct.
around. It's kind
Yeah.
of like social psychology fascinating.
Lemmings.
You can just move the target,
Those are
you know?
lemmings. Those are
Yeah.
lemmings. 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 And if that bothers you, good.
Mm. But I think in any spiritual context, and we're doing these things, but we're putting it in the context of like the spiritual traditions we believe in. You can't have that kind of thing. Right. You
No,
can't have a moving target in a true spirituality where you're just going to like. So I think that's fine to call out. And as an individual, if you're going to spiritually progress as an individual, you can't have these features. They have to go. We all have to transcend these things ultimately,
I
right?
mean, the Ten Commandments, man, it's not that, the golden rule is there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you want
That's
to do
it.
if you want to do Jesus, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's really not it's not very difficult. It really isn't, you know?
It's confounding on some level at the same time, right?
No, but
How easy
people
it is to move that around.
people want to
Crazy.
be led, dude. That's just it. It's much easier to be led. It's much easier to not think. It's much easier to give your head away and, just follow.
I
Like
think that's, oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't cut off.
no,
Go.
like
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a simple thing, but like I don't have Twitter. You know why? There's only one reason why. There's literally only one reason why. I ain't following no motherfucking body anywhere. Follow me? Nope. I didn't even know what it was. I think it was like 2008 or 9, and I was working for some company, and the guy who was, I guess, my supervisor or boss at the time, he's like, "Oh, you should follow me on Twitter." And I was like, "Where?" He's like, "Oh, I post what I got going on." I was like, "We're talking right now. Tell me, what do you have going on?" He's like, "Well, no, just whatever." And I was like, "Bro, you're tripping. No, I ain't following shit." So that's just my own particular thing. But I think for the most part, people want to be. They don't want to think. Tell me what time to be there. Tell me what we're eating. I don't want to. Why would I have to think for myself? That means I have to be responsible for my actions. That means I have to maybe not listen to everything that everybody tells me and believe it as 100% truth. That there might be something that's partly true and something that's not partly true. And I'm going to have to make my own decisions and decide, what do I actually believe? And you have to put the onus back on the self. These are some of the teachings of the person that the religion is named after, that they have no desire to actually teach, you know?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because I think in the things that we're trying to advocate here, you know, which is like for us, home bases might be like Buddhist Tantra or Taoist things or Zen things or Sufi things, or whatever. That theme has to go all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be an independent being. I can't be a follower. I have to be independent, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to express my own independent spiritual authenticity. It has to be that way. There's like no
Mm-hmm.
way around. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so within the context of like being able to direct this, then there becomes this idea of like sort of you can always claim a kind of bizarre perpetual victimhood,
Yeah.
which is fascinating in that too. Like no matter who you are, you still claim that you're the victim of like other people. And this is toxic, right? At the core. If you want to get to some spirituality around this, I think all the traditions we're talking about, but this is especially mentioned in like the Kabbalah, right? You can't go through and take on a victim mentality because it'll bring out the worst parts of your spiritual being, the
Mm.
worst part of the psyche. The minute you're in that victim mindset, you should be very wary of that,
Mm.
right? You go victim mindset, it always leads to these ugly places. It has a darkness to it, that victim mentality. And you can see that it can then lead to this like, let's pivot the target around to like different people when you can kind of be able to kick that in on mass scale.
Mm.
Very true, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't matter how much power you have. It's some weird psychological thing that you can still sort of say we're the disempowered group, right? I guess it's the
Yeah.
grievance culture things and all that. But very true. Wherever you have like orthodoxy, it happens. I think April LaJoy, who I've been mentioning here and there in episodes, who wrote Star Spangled Jesus, when she looks back at it, she said that was astonishing how much that was part of our psychology, right? This constant like feeling that we were the victims of like other people, no matter how much power and security we had, that was always a flip that could be switched. And it's, again, psychospiritually fascinating. Or as a capper for us, maybe as a tantric podcast too, is the idea of like being kind of like anti-women and anti-sexuality.
Not us, these other people.
Yeah, not us. We're against that.
Yeah,
We're anti-women. We're
that's right.
anti-sex.
Yes.
But like how often that's played too, that you get a kind of a theme of like
Yeah.
these features. And in some of these, again, we were talking about the new apostolic revelation or whatever, Reformation, sorry. Like there'll even be these bizarre conversations about like women shouldn't have the independent vote and it should just be under the control of the man who's the head of the household. They talk that way.
Mm,
That's like Pete Hegseth's pastor,
mm,
like it's kind of bizarre. So, that is part of the features of this. And then, sexuality itself is always going to have this stigma around it,
mm-hmm,
particularly when you get women asserting sexuality or anything that like has homosexuality within it, like that's always going to be a problem. So okay, so that's like I think like a little mini checklist of like orthodoxy as it goes, right? I
mm-hmm.
thought it was important to do it just because, like we were talking about earlier, you can spread that around to any Orthodox tradition and just have it as a thing. And then once you see that, you can go, okay, well, these are the features of Orthodoxy. And then I think we're intrinsically arguing whether you talk on a social level or an individual level, these things have to go in
Yeah.
order to make spiritual progress
And
as an individual or as a community or as a society or whatever it is. Yeah,
and talking about like, disempowering women and sexuality, it's also the disempowerment of pleasure specifically.
that's true.
And, as tantric practitioners, that is that's one of the main drivers. So just like on a base level, like meditation practice, right? And again, I had a talk with a client today. He's like, I just can't do it, man. My mind just goes everywhere. I can't turn it off. I was like, yeah, don't try. Like, leave it.
Oh,
Just
talking about the sexuality
no,
aspects.
no, just about
Oh, okay.
meditation in general. He was
Hmm.
like, I said, just sit down and see who shows up. Just that's good enough for right now.
Yeah.
But so people to for people to practice, there has to be some motivation for anything, exercise, writing, music, whatever, going to work, doesn't matter. There's an aspect of discipline, and that can move you for sure. Some people are not disciplined. They're just like it's just hard for them to find this. However, if you enjoy doing something, if you actually like it, it's pleasurable for you, you'll do it on a regular basis. And so this kind of motivation is pulled out of many of these traditions because of how puritanical they are. That they look at the, as objects of desire as the influence of Satan, the influence of evilness. And I don't know where this came from, but I've been looking into a man by the name of Jacob Frank, who is
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. And
Magic,
yeah,
Kabbalistic magic person.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
very interesting. Now, listen, they are into all the pleasure rituals and things like this, and they're wife swapping, and they're incestuous, and so I'm not on that front. However,
Mhm.
he gave a quote that said something along the lines of like, Elohim wanted a servant, and so he talked with his saints, and they're like, well, you should make them flesh and spirit, so they're like us. And then Elohim, which is like the high God,
One of
was
the names
like,
of gods. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, he was like, no, I want to make them of flesh only, you know, so they can experience more pleasure essentially, and they're going to have the opportunity to sin. Why? Because that they're going to learn They're going to have the ability to do things that we are unable to do. And I love that, and I love how it fits right here, which is why I'm sharing it, because so much of what you were talking about, victimhood and women and like literalism and orthodoxy and heterodoxy, a lot of that is all based around very hard lines, very
Mhm.
strong structure of what's right and what isn't right, following in the quote unquote the way of how it should be. This is what orthodoxy is. And then whatever someone believes something should be, there is everything else is how it isn't and why that is wrong. And what's interesting about this character, Jacob Frank, is that like he just flips everything upside down. He's like, no, yeah, whatever we shouldn't be, whatever we should not do, we should do that. That's
Yeah, there
exactly what
is
we
those
should do.
traditions that are like that. I mean, we're going to do a little bit on the Gnostics when we get there, and it's like, hey, they told you that story. I'll flip all the characters around for you. The snake's the good guy. This guy's the bad guy in the Garden of Eden. Like Eve did the right thing. Everyone who
Yeah.
told her not to do it was wrong. That's the flipperoo around that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's specifically in tantric practice, it's the use of pleasure that can alternate someone's mind. I had a session with somebody, some years ago, and the first thing that she said to me, and she had some good abilities, was like, can we make an agreement today? And I said, what's that? She goes, yeah. She goes, you don't have to have all of your lessons being the hardest ones possible. Maybe we can use another method for your learning in this lifetime.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Something like maybe something more pleasant, you know?
Yeah, we never know where these episodes are going to go, and this will probably be close to our ending of this particular one, but it's really true. Like when I first started doing Zen, I was, we're both raised Christian Catholic, right? That's
Yeah,
still somewhere within us, right? So I'm
totally.
doing this Zen, and it would be painful. And there was a part of me that was like, okay, good. Because I got to earn it, right?
Yeah.
If it's a little painful and not earning it, that little kind of Catholic thing is still like floating around in there, right? And I did learn a lot, and Zen was wonderful. It certainly can be painful, but it was wonderful too. And there were moments of like ecstasy within it that I was also finding. And we talked about in previous episodes, I also would sometimes do meditations that were a little bit more Taoist, a little bit more trying to get the good sexual energy going. And so I was kind of cheating, not pure Zen, but it was like learning that question, like, okay, this doesn't have to be all harsh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of like, again, like it's very interesting. Maybe we can all contemplate this. You look at a list like that, and maybe you're raised Catholic, and you're not maybe not even the most Orthodox Catholic in the world, but you can still pick pieces out of that where yeah, that is an issue. I can remember that from my past, or maybe you can kind of use a little microscope on ourselves and go, there's still a little of that shit that floats around, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and I think it was a big deal for me. It happened in stages. I think my Chinese mentor, Dr. Wang, Master Shengli Wang, made a big point about this. And I don't know if he was influenced by coming from China and being here. I think he already had these ideas a little bit brewing from his Chinese teachers. But I think part of what he felt like was, man, these people don't know how to experience happiness or pleasure. There's something blocking them, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And he really had that strong feeling. We talked about in different episodes here and there, but it still fits here.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at my own history, it was, oh yeah, there was like something in me, a little seed of something orthodox, we want to frame it that way, that was going to block that. And then it was like kind of like if I think about my own, we all have our own stories we're going on, our own ways of what we feel are our spiritual progresses that we made and the things that we tried to work through. And part of that really did have, or maybe even to the present day to some extent, still had to do with that thing of being open to the idea like, no, pleasure is okay on the spiritual path. Pleasure is
Yeah.
okay. We did a little thing where we were meditating with some of the people who were part of our retreat that we ran earlier in the year, our first Jin and Tantra meditation retreat. And that was coming up in those conversations too,
Mm-hmm.
and each of us in our own way was trying to say, like, this can be pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
You can use pleasure as part of your spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
But to the extent that you have like the orthodoxy hidden there, within the religion that you've been exposed to, or maybe just hidden in the culture overall, right? Like kind of what you're talking about in the very beginning of the episode. Whether you feel that you're Christian or not, you're living in the Christian culture.
Absolutely.
You were raised to be Christian. Whether you
Yes.
know it or not,
Correct.
you are. This is why I think these episodes are fascinating because we can talk through all of this stuff and it gives us all of us a chance to really reflect on like to what extent that's true. And I think we would both argue that it's really true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can kind of like hunt those kind of things out. So we were talking about it in the podcast. Sorry, we were talking about in the thing we did over the weekend. We ran a kind of little mini meditation session for everybody, right? We kind of like had a like a little retreat reunion. We did one of these things, which is great. And that subject matter was coming up, right? And it got me thinking afterwards about my own life. And I think about this a fair amount. Okay, I came from this Orthodox thing, had a lot of that feeling of like no pain, no gain,
Mm,
you know, uh, okay, it hurts a little bit. That's probably for the good, right? I'll learn like what you were talking about. I'll learn everything the hard way,
mm,
right? And that moving away from that into things like, again, my Chinese mentor being more Taoist or being into like, again, ultimately the Tantras and things like that. No, let's flip this switch around and make it more about using the pleasure as an ultimate spiritual kind of goal, right? And in the end, like what is like spiritual progress if you want to go all the way to enlightenment, or what's the spiritual going to be? It's going to be pleasurable, right? So in the tantras, part of the idea as we wrap up the episode, well, and it's interesting it went this way, is going to be like that pleasurable experience is a simulation, a hint, a guide to what the spirit really feels like, or what the experience of God would really feel like, or what the experience of the Tao,
mm.
or the pure ground of being. It's going to feel blissful, right? It's not going to feel like some cut off, boxed in, negative, unpleasant thing. All
Right.
right. Anyways, so interesting. Okay, you never know where these are going to go.
We don't.
Yeah,
We don't.
but good path,
Yeah.
right?
And so we'll continue as we go along in here unpacking things.
Yeah,
Yep. And it's, right on time for the return of the sun, as they
yeah, yeah,
say
yeah,
in the pagan tradition, or Jesus's birthday. Oh, wow.
yeah.
Sup
This will be out like around that time, right?
Surprisingly how close those things are related. Huh. Interesting.
Suspiciously close for our
Yeah.
Wiccan friends out there. Boy,
That's
that
that's
seems to have to do with some, astrological, astronomical stuff going on there. Yeah, yeah,
diabolical, if you will.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric, as
Thanks so
always.
much. Yeah,
Yep. Audience, thanks for tuning in. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. You could leave a comment here or find us on the gram at the Gin and Tantra Podcast. Like, comment, subscribe, share our work. Whatever, man. We love it. Take care. Peace.